Well, I have a special treat for you. A very good friend, serial entrepreneur, CEO, and founder of one of the most creative companies out there. Jason and I have been in a number of mastermind groups together, and there's really a bond that I think you're going to have too, because he really makes a difference. And he's one of those rare individuals that's not only a great entrepreneur, but also can bring in kind of something that most of us who are a little linear or logical can't do as well. And it's bringing in the culture. And we're going to talk about the power of really culture in our organizations and making a huge difference, and how important it is when we screw it up along the way. So you don't want to miss this. If it's important to accelerate your success, and that's what we're all here about. I'm John Bowen, as founder of AES Nation. It's all about accelerating your success. You want these lessons. Stay tuned.
Ordinary success? No way. You want amazing, remarkable, exceptional breakthroughs. Dig deep. Think bold, drive hard, watch yourself soar beyond your dreams. AESNation.com.
Jason, I am so excited to have you here, my friend. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Well, I always think of you as a Renaissance man. I know this is kind of a little scary and all that, but you know, before we get into the culture, one of the things I always love to do is to get a little bit of background. And you've got, you and I share a love of a lot of things, and some of it you've done in your background. Just give a little bit of how you got to where you are today.
So, well, a very long story, but my previous life, I was in the wine business, and had a couple of wineries in California. Wound up sold them. Wound up with a company based in the UK, where we did a lot of global sourcing and production for the large European grocery chains, and through that wound up with a winery in South Africa. And it was the very early days of social media, sort of 2004. It was before Twitter. It was before Facebook. It was, just sort of blogs, and everybody, and I don't know if you remember those days, but everybody was very excited about how, how blogging was.
I'm old enough, Jason, that I do remember those days.
Great. So, back then, the weird thing about the wine business is that you've got these fabulous stories to tell, and it's very alluring. But for most brands, you don't have the budget to really to promote. So for us, and so what winds up happening is that all of your promotion goes into doing things like winemaking dinners, really small activities. So when I saw blogs, I thought, wow, this is just a hugely valuable thing for a very story intensive business like wine. And so we started blogging. From our South African winery, did some really interesting, and groundbreaking work. There's literally dozens and dozens of white papers and books and stuff that have been written or mentioned what we've done. But we really did the first case study on how you can use blogs, the beginning of social media, to create a global brand. And so fast forward, one of the ways that we did that was really through this idea of linking up more meaning and purpose around our product, instead of just talking about wine, which for us was kind of boring, right? So we want to talk about not the wine itself, but what people do with it. To make a very long story short, the folks who were watching blogs in the beginning of social media back then were all tech, and we developed a big following in the tech world. And what we had hooked up with a cartoonist at the time named Hugh McLeod, who had a website called Gaping Void. And part of what we did was a global sort of promotion around sending prints to people in different parts of the world if they sponsored dinners that used our wine. And to make a very long story short, what we wound up having happen was people within big companies would use these prints for dinners, but then the effect would go way past the dinner, and they would start to use these things within their businesses, and in ways that was really disruptive and really allowed them to connect with their coworkers and colleagues around ideas of change. Right. And it sounds kind of crazy. If anybody's interested, you could Google Microsoft Blue Monster. It's a great example of the sort of work we did. And what we saw was that you could impact large organizations by connecting ideas to visual tools that really transcended any sort of form of training or traditional change that you'd see in organizations. And that was the beginning of what became Gaping Void and our culture design business.
I'll tell you, Jason, I was blown away with it, and the way I met you was through Joe Polish, Genius Network, and I'm forgetting Hugh's first book, or not first book. It was, I think, his second book that Joe gave everybody in his Genius Network, and on the flight back from Phoenix to San Jose, I read it. It's a great read, and it's so much talked about the challenge for so many workers and so many businesses on what we're talking about today, the culture that you couldn't you knew there had to be a better way of doing things than what most people were doing. And one of the things I want to ask you, and then as we've gotten to know each other, this whole concept of culture matters. And I know you've shared with me, and I've seen great examples of how you actually have leveraged it using your marketing ability and Hugh's unbelievable talent as well. But let's go into the culture matters part. Why does it matter? Why, as we've got our fellow entrepreneurs here that you're hanging out with a cup of coffee, a glass of wine maybe, or potentially even exercising. Why does culture matter? If I'm a CEO, I've got an owner of a business, why is that big a deal?
So it's a complex area, and there's a number of answers, and I'll go through them quickly. So first off, operationally, what culture really is comprised of is a set of beliefs, mindset, mental models around how people do their work, right? And those beliefs, right, which together creates a mindset, are what informs people's behaviors moment to moment, day to day in their organizations. And it's those behaviors that give you your operational outcomes. So for a lot of CEOs, because they don't really understand the dynamics, they think, oh, culture's super soft. It's foosball and pizza and just keeping people happy. No, the reality of it is that it is the operating system of your business. We think of it in terms of it being like the operating system of your phone, right? If it's working well, if it's up to date, if people are aligned around it, then everything works smoothly. But we're an operating system, and I don't know if you did an upgrade, in the last upgrade on iOS. I did, and my phone hasn't worked properly since because it wasn't designed properly. There isn't alignment. Everything's much slower, and that is the equivalent to culture. When you are actually aligned around beliefs, mindset, you get the right behaviors, you get the right outcomes. And you can see that play out in many different ways, and in very public ways over the last couple of years. And I'll cite a couple of examples. But the other question is around culture is why it matters to employees, right? So you've got your business outcome approach, and it is and there's good data around it, which we might get to. But the question is, why now is it mattering more to employees? And that's actually a really interesting question. Because what we've seen over the years and what our research has shown is that people have always been very connected to the work they do, right? If you go back to 100, 200, 300 years ago, work and home life were totally connected. It was all part of the same thing. If you think about the old cities of Europe, if you go to Italy or France or places like Sheffield, England, Sheffield, England, once upon a time was a place where they only made cutlery, right? And the people who worked in those cutlery factories, were the same people whose kids married each other and they went to church together and they socialized together. And there was this complete integration of work and home life. And that's the way people always lived. And the Industrial Revolution really tried to separate out, home and work because there was a clearer definition between private time and work time. But what's happened over the years is that people have this desire for work to become more meaningful. And you see that play out in terms of social entrepreneurship and the way certain companies become far more popular, because what they realize is that when you supply people with more meaning in their work, then amazing things can happen. And our client and friends over at Zappos are great examples of that, right? They have a very straightforward kind of business where it's a website, call center, warehousing, but they've added a layer of meaning and purpose to
it's
that.
only
to
shoes,
business,
Jason. So that, how can you make that, a strong culture there? And, and then we know the value of it too when Amazon purchased it. It's just unbelievable.
Sure.
But yeah,
So
how did they do it type thing? How are they?
So if you look at the human condition, people crave, meaning and purpose in their lives, right? And they have to be aligned to some outcome which is bigger than them, right? So most business by nature is very transactional, right? And the problem is that transactions, it's hard to find meaning in transactions. So the default becomes about numbers and metrics, right? But what people really want to understand is how they're helping others. They want to understand what impact they're having in the world. They want to feel that they are succeeding at their chosen endeavor. It's a complex web of very emotional things that drive engagement at work. And so when you reduce it just to metrics, right, to just numbers, what winds up happening is that people disengage. And that's why, Gallup has been running annual engagement surveys, global surveys, since 1992. And since 92, the US number has basically flatlined at 30% engagement. European engagement's at 19, and Japanese engagement, most of Asia, is at 9%, right? When these are staggering numbers, right? So no one's been able to really impact that, because what they understand engagement to be is actually a broken model. What people need to have is emotional connection to their work. And when we go into companies, we're looking at, okay, how is it possible to connect emotion to the business outcomes that the organization needs to achieve? And that is where you get magic, right?
Well,
and that's what Zappos was able to do.
Well, and I want to touch on where the magic isn't too. Matter of fact, my wife unfortunately is going through some health challenges, and we're in healthcare, and we're in Silicon Valley, and I even named Stanford. I went with her for one of the appointments, and literally people were coming in crying because they couldn't get the records, they couldn't get their paperwork. The place was in disarray. May have great doctors and all that, but if you don't have that, that's a real problem. And it's a great, it wasn't my responsibility. That person, I'll make sure they get it. We can't do it while you're here. We're going to do it the next day. Nobody's solving problems, and it's just the waiting room is like unbelievable. Compared to going to, we can give a lot of great examples, like airline. The difference between Virgin America or Alaska out here and, just about everybody else, people really want to serve you and make it a great experience. And then you just see over and over again when that's not the culture. Matter of fact, let me put up the slide, Jason, that you gave me on, let's talk about, there are some great examples of Zappos being one, but, on the best places to work, best services and profitability, tell us what we're looking at here.
So John, I want to just address a couple of your points about the healthcare experience just before we get to this, because it's very aligned to it, and you can keep the slide up if you want. So here's what happens over generations of cultural alignment around industries, right? So in healthcare, what is valued is clinical excellence, right? What's valued is professionalism in delivering care from a clinical perspective. And doctors and nurses for generations were taught that all that matters is you're treating a system, right? That you need to be objective, you need to be unemotional, you need to just deal with the facts, and you need to do your work. And what winds up happening over time is that the idea of patient as customer goes away, and what you're treating is a body and not a person. And so you see that play out in the healthcare world, over and over and over again, where people feel that as patients that they don't get the care that they really need because the caregiver actually doesn't care about them. They care about fixing their problem, but they don't care about them as a human. They don't care about the emotional challenges that they're going through. And that's what you just described are these organizations that are set up to be transactional and not to really care about the holistic well-being of an individual. And you mentioned the airline industry, and that's a great example. So there was the huge United Airlines debacle it was a year and a half ago now, or a year ago, where they dragged that poor fellow off a plane in order to make a seat available to a United employee, right? So we look at that as a cultural lapse, right? And so why do we say that? Because in a world, in the airline world, one of the key questions is, who is your customer, right? Like, do you value your customers? Are we just running planes as efficiently as possible? Do we value rules and regulations over customer well-being? Well, United demonstrated they actually don't care about their customers. They dragged the guy off the plane, really, objectively for no good reason. They created a huge PR problem for themselves. But see, that's why culture matters more than ever in this day and age, because everything is transparent and things don't happen very often behind a curtain anymore. And we see that with Michigan State disaster recently, Wells Fargo, Theranos, Starbucks incident a few weeks ago in Philadelphia. Apple's iPhone slowed down on their operating system. Where something like that was deliberate and orchestrated. Right.
No, I bought my cheap battery to get it, take care of it. But the thing that is so amazing, and that's the point I think that's so important for all of us as business owners to really recognize, is that you can't get away with anything anymore. I mean, the whole media part is so quick, and with Twitter and Instagram and on and on and on we have of distribution. You cannot control distribution. You can't control PR, but what you can do, and that's what I want to touch on. I'm going to pull that slide back up on best places. What you can do, and some of the best firms in the world are doing, is they're influencing culture, and they're creating this dynamic culture in their business, and this is something all of us should be doing. Jason, tell me a little bit about this here.
Sure. So this slide was actually created by a fellow named Len Schlesinger, who's a professor at Harvard Business School, an old friend and client of ours. He used to be president of Babson College, and we did work for him at Babson. And before that, he was a COO and co-chairman of the Limited, which of course includes Victoria's Secret and lots of other big retail brands. But so Len had done some research and shared this with us, and so and basically said, look, that creating a wonderful place to work and actually isn't just about making employees happy. It's actually about operational excellence. And he particularly looked at service industries and said essentially, when you create a great place to work and when you're really focused on the service piece of it, what you wind up creating is a more profitable business with dramatic differentiation from the marketplace. All right. So if you look at these companies that are listed on the right side of the slide, whether it's Nordstrom, Publix, Quicken, Southwest, these are all industries that really stand out in their field, because they do things differently and they have a different set of values than their competitors do. So while no company, no large business can operate without a problem, you would never imagine Southwest dragging a customer off of a plane and blooding their nose. It just wouldn't happen.
I start laughing as you say that, because I just can't imagine it. We're United, it's not that hard.
Exactly. So we talk about, I'll go back to it, this idea of culture as an operating system. It is, we have a phrase we borrowed from our friend Seth Godin, which is this idea of people like us do things like this. This is how we do things in our organization. These are the boundaries of what's acceptable. And when you have a real sense of who you are and how you do what you do, then you need fewer rules and regulations, and you can allow people to do their best work without the kinds of restrictions that you must have in organizations where people don't understand those things, and you see it play out over and over and over again. And because of this transparency, there is significant business risk especially for large companies, where they do not have well-defined cultures. And that is it's a huge area of concern for us as we go into clients.
Yeah, I think large companies, it can explode and be billions of dollars, but for small companies, oftentimes it's a missed opportunity. So I want to start going into the solution, Jason. Let's go into your culture change model here. How do we fix this? If we don't, we're not.
Okay,
none of us are perfect, as we both know. I think.
Yeah, of course. So we developed this actually early this year, but it was out of some work we did with a fellow named BJ Fogg, who runs the Stanford Behavior Design Lab. And BJ's become a famous guy over the last few years, especially because a lot of his students have gone on to found things like Instagram and Snapchat, and they did it based upon some of his behavior models. And so this came out. So we had collaborated with BJ last year because I was my approach was, okay, when it comes to culture ultimately, as I described earlier, is about behavior. And so what can we learn from what he's done in behavior design? So what we came up with this model, and the reason why I personally love it is because it really simplifies the whole idea of what you need to do to execute around culture, and it simplifies and it makes it all understandable. So basically, there's three components to how you affect culture change, and it's not just changing culture; it's reinforcing great culture or fixing bad culture. But this is how you do it, right? So essentially, the first, if you look at the y-axis, you have this FMS, and FMS stands for future motivated state. So that's the idea of why should people care? It's the motivation that you want to bring to the workplace. Famously in the past, it would be the equivalent of Bill Gates has a computer on every desk, a personal computer on every desk, or Elon Musk talking about going to Mars, or in a more social political sense, you could think about Martin Luther King and a lot of the great leaders in the past. But the idea is, how do you motivate people about some big outcome that makes them get out of bed in the morning and come to work and go, yes, I'm part of something larger, making a difference. Okay, so you need to articulate that and codify it and make it clear for people. Fine. So the next step is, and this is the x-axis, is what we call AV, which is articulated beliefs. So the thing about articulated beliefs is we're all familiar with this idea of core values, right? And core values are usually a list of 5 or 10 things that that maybe live on a poster somewhere, that live on a website possibly, but are a list of nice things to have, but oftentimes, and most often, live somewhere that nobody can even remember what they are, right? And the idea is that we say that core values is part of a belief system, but what you want to do is develop a really robust system around what do you believe in as a business, and that includes how we treat each other, how we treat customers, how we deal with things like the environment, what happens when there's a problem, what do we think of being curious, what are the competencies and mental models we use in the work that we do. And so eventually you might wind up with 50 or 100 or even 150 different ideas, and we're not suggesting that everybody needs to understand or to even to memorize these things, but they together form the beliefs under which you do business. And then finally, so you have this motivational piece, you have this belief system, which is, you can think about as an extended version of core values, and then you have what we the S on this model, and the S represents socialization, and this is the thing that most people don't understand, which is whatever your beliefs are and whatever the motivations are, none of it matters unless you heavily socialize it. And we say socialize it, what we mean is have people interact with it every day as many times as possible. And not just internally, but externally. So, we mentioned Zappos earlier. If you think about their core values, one of them is delivering wow. Right? So delivering wow is all about customer experience, and the customers know it. So the customers have an expectation before they interact with an employee, and so the employees hold themselves to a higher standard because they know what the expectation is. So all culture, every bit of culture, hinges on the socialization of these ideas, and if you don't socialize it, nothing happens, right? So the key question then becomes, how do you socialize, right? Because it's not just an email. It's not just maybe a video or something that a CEO might do once in a while. It has to embed itself in the daily lives of employees and hopefully customers as well.
It's
Does that make sense, John?
Yeah, it really does. And, it's one of the things that I see as kind of a missed opportunity, that we all have is that we kind of let things happen. And, some of us focus on profitability. Some of us focus on, great client experience, generating that profitability. Some work on our team. And, we saw that sweet spot earlier on of the best companies. And then, really, I always think of it as vision, but having that compelling, process, going back to your example, let me just pull it up here, your formula is what we have, the FMS, the future motivational state. I mean, something that is inspiring. I think of Elon Musk, with the Mars, the electric car, and we go on and creating those beliefs, and then having really a part of the social fabric that they want to accomplish this, and you show that star, the ideal, and this is where it really, to me, gets very exciting. And most of us aren't thinking through it, and this is so important because I'm gonna pull up the cultural brand map that you gave us, Jason, because there's, when we look at the intersection of how many different things it affects as we're getting our messages out, and really internally as well, it's huge. I mean, why don't you touch on this as well? Because this is a big one, and I look at it and I go, this is a lot of work.
Yeah, and it is a lot of work, and we don't suggest that for any entrepreneur that you even have the capacity to execute on this whole brand map. But the idea is, and if we think everyone, and when they talk about culture, talks about Zappos, and so we generally don't like to, but they're just such a great execution of what culture can be. And it's worth talking about. So if you look at this culture brand map, really what you think about is this idea of employment experience as brand. Right? So really well defined. What do we believe in? What are we doing here? Why do we do what we do? This whole rich sort of belief system around what it means to be here. People like us do things like this. And once you get that implemented and executed, broadly enough within your business, and it doesn't matter whether you've got 5 people or 50,000 people, then what you're able to do is to view the world and what you do through that lens, right? And so you've got the beliefs that inform all those behaviors, right? Which has a direct impact on performance. And so you've got people aligned around the execution. Then the question is, how do you communicate it to the world? And so you've got these opportunities to then tell your story in a really unique way through blogs, through Instagram, through all the social media platforms, which we all know. You've got a lens through which you can look at doing social good. Now, you don't have to spend a ton of money, but there's little things you can do that have impact locally or in a bigger scale. You then have the ability to really recruit employees who are aligned to your beliefs. And I think that's one of the really interesting things about culture, is because when you really articulate it well, and it's really clear for people, you attract people who are aligned to it, and you repel people who aren't. And one of our perspectives is actually repelling the wrong people is more valuable than attracting the right people, because we all know that some of our biggest time sums and some of our biggest problems are actually caused by having the wrong people in the organization. But then the question is, like, how do you tell the stories? Because now you have a basis for telling stories, because you've got this belief system. So then you can do earned media, you can do all your PR publicity, embed it in your website. But the point is that through culture, you can actually take care of a huge burden of marketing and execution in other areas of the business. It's got nothing to do with HR. It's got nothing to do with how people usually think about culture. It's a really powerful way to really drive and manage your business forward and really create a place that's differentiated from all your competitors. And I always botch this quote, but Tony Zappos always talks about this idea of culture being one of the only things that your competitors can't steal or copy from you, right? And it's really true.
It really is. And one of the things, Jason, I want to go to, and it's kind of a resource that you do, and I've been in with a number of firms where you've really put this in play internally. And I want to bring up your website on Culture Wall, because this has been a wow. Tell me what this is, or tell our fellow entrepreneurs what this is, because most places don't have this, and it's a missed opportunity, or they got a poster or two, type thing, versus really something thoughtful.
Okay. So here's what happens. So we one of just to go back to B.J. Fogg at Stanford for a minute. One of his premises is this idea of how context shifts behavior, right? So context is really the physical environment in which you're living or you're working, right? So think about it in the most dramatic sense. You walk into an old cathedral in Europe, and you are surrounded with ideas that remind you of religion, of behavior, of what there is to love, what there is to hate, what there is to fear, right? It doesn't matter whether you're a religious person or not. You have to feel something, right? And so what is that all about, right? That's clearly about beliefs. And if you think about it, if you borrow a few things from that, you say, look, if you're creating a belief system for your business or for your organization, it doesn't matter, because we do a lot of work in higher ed and do a lot of executions around beliefs in say career centers and places like that, and healthcare. But once you're able to articulate it and you visualize it, then what you have is an ability to connect people on a regular basis to the work. We talked about socialization earlier, right? So the idea is that the way you get to socialize ideas is through language and through visual tools. We call it social objects, some people call it cultural artifacts, but the idea is that you can visualize a set of beliefs that then inform people's behavior. So what we do is we turn these into these little 12-inch square pieces of artwork that live on a wall in a place. There's usually 20 or 30 of them. Sometimes people go crazy, do 40 or 50. But basically the idea is each one represents one of those beliefs that really drive your organization. And then they live in a place, and then you have a way of having those conversations where you can have group meetings around it. You get actually digital versions of those pieces so that you can put it on screens or onboarding materials, or spread it through social media. But what you then have is a system through which you can then spread your ideas, connect with customers, connect people internally, and it's all in a nice, neat, tight package where it gives you a way of having these conversations and spreading these ideas, which ordinarily is actually super hard to do. Oh. So we call it culture walls, but what it is really a management tool to help you spread the beliefs that drive your business.
Well, and Jason, let me, one of the things, I'm going to pull up your website. I'm going to go down a bit, and you have one with the best side of Joe Polish is back here. Let's see. Yep, I got it there. But he's got a cultural wall in his office. It's pretty amazing. And one of the things that I love about it is he does a lot of his filming with speakers up against that wall, and there isn't a day that everyone in their organization isn't looking at this, and it really, and it's personalized to his messages, really the whole team's, or not only on their culture, and it's kind of that magic of entrepreneurs who nailing a great client experience, what that is to them. Also, really developing some great value to the consumers, the teammates, and then obviously profitable. And I'm gonna just flip through here real quick, but the headlines, I'd encourage people to read this. However you do it, this is something that I think just makes such a difference. Is putting together what makes a difference for the team. It's a big part of that socialization. It's a reminder. It comes together well. Jason, let's go to resources. So I'm going to kind of tell me a little bit about if somebody wanted to follow up with you and work with you on the cultural side. How would they do that?
So, well, you can just reach me at Jason at gapingvoid.com, JASON at gapingvoid.com. But we do, everything from sort of small sort of culture wall projects to large scale change projects. I mean, typically, most of our clients are companies like Microsoft. I mentioned Zappos earlier. We've done a ton of work at companies like Rackspace down in San Antonio over the years, AT&T. So while we're not a large consultancy, most of our clients tend to be enterprise, but very often, and more and more often lately, so the mid-market firms are coming to us and saying, "Can you help us, design our culture?" And I think one of the things that differentiates what we do is this idea that we're very clear that culture is designable and there's a process around execution, right? And we always start at the beginning, which is understanding what the current state is, and then overlaying it through our frameworks and really getting insights as to what needs to shift to get an organization more functional. So we do that. We run assessments that are relatively low cost, and then execute based upon the needs of the organization. But our approach always is get in, create the tools, create the systems, make sure train people so that they understand how to do it, and then we let them get to it. And we're always around to help, but we're very sort of aligned to getting in, getting work delivered, and getting and getting out, right? So it's all about building tools that make this sustainable. So if somebody just wants to do a culture wall, for example, we do a little facilitation. Usually it's virtual. We then create language. We then visualize it and deliver it, and that can be done as quickly as a month. And it's worth pointing out on that the webpage that you were showing earlier. Yeah, you can see a culture wall that we did for Amazon, but also. We do a lot of work in higher education. One is for Babson College. Yeah, that one right there was for Babson College. And so the woman, Susan Brennan, who's pictured there, is the head of career services, and she's just actually left to go to MIT Sloan. We'll be doing a project there. And her whole thing was, how do I align students and employers and parents and all these other people around what we believe in? And we delivered that wall last year, and she called me it was in January this year. She said the best thing she did all last year was the wall, because it's helping her have conversations that she would never otherwise be able to have with all of our stakeholders. And that's the sort of power that we give people, just to be able to have, to really spread ideas around what's meaningful, which is ordinarily pretty hard to do.
No, it really is. Well, let me go over kind of key takeaways that I'm walking away with. And it's very clear that, culture matters, number one. We tell a whole bunch of disasters. We can tell a whole bunch of success stories. We all know that as fellow entrepreneurs. Second is we've got to have a model. I really do like the model that Jason shared with us. Again, you can go to aesnation.com. We'll have show notes on everything, all the links that we talked about. Recognize that there is a process that we can use to, once we get clear on what is our culture, how we can bring it out and really go through. I'm going to flash that slide real quick again. And this is the cultural brand map, and we just have so much building on our own employee experience as a brand, beliefs, performance, and then getting it out there. The power, and what I really like that Jason made a very clear point is, one of the things in fast-growing businesses like yours, like mine, Jason's, we need really good talent. And one of the best ways of having talent is having a clear culture that excites them about working with us. And then I've seen in place these walls and just, the inspiring action it does. So, Jason, thank you again for spending the great time and sharing with us, exactly how companies can make a huge difference. I'd go to our website, aesnation.com, look at the show notes. We'll have the ability for you to see each of these steps. And most importantly, your teammates, your clients, your future clients are counting on you. Go implement. We wish you the best of success.
Thanks.
Exceptional, remarkable breakthroughs. aesnation.com